Thank you so much, Declan, and thank you to everyone listening in. I'm excited to present today, and this has been a topic that has been burning in me for a while, and I had said this in the last session, but in part one, but I had, Declan gave me a call and said, I'd love you to present a webinar for us, wondering what you'd like to do, and part two of Time to Plant was what I originally really wanted to do, because I've run into clients in my consulting practice who are really excited to do a capital campaign, and if they would have thought about that a couple years, they've been like, yeah, we've been planning on this for 2 years, and now we're ready to go. And if they were to talk to me 2 years earlier, this session is what I would have told them. And so for those of you that are thinking about a campaign in the next year, 2, 3, 4, this is something that I'm hoping will be helpful for you in preparing for that future capital campaign. At the same time, there's some of you that are thinking about a capital campaign either starting it now or in the middle of one. And so these are some things that hopefully will be helpful to you as well. A little bit about me. I'm from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. I started my career as the development director at Hope Gospel Mission, which is a Christian homeless shelter, and helps with fundraising, volunteer programs, and public relations. That is where my first capital campaign happened, and it was for a women's shelter. And that was quite an education for me when I got started, given that I didn't even know what the word development meant at that time. I thought it was training and development instead of development as a way for describing fundraising. So certainly have gone a long way since then, and now I work with clients all over the country in fundraising, in governance, and other areas as well. What are we going to talk about today? Well, this is part two of A Time to Plant, and part one, what we did is we really talked about what capital campaigns are. How do they work? What are their benefits, their phases, their strategies? What all goes into that? And if you didn't hear that session, I'd recommend you go back and listen to it. We can get you the handouts, and we can get you the audio link, the YouTube link to that, because I think it'll be really helpful. Today what we're going to do is we're going to go and actually review a little bit of part one. I'm going to just zip through a couple ideas that I think are really important to understand, but I'm not going to go into them in depth because, once again, it's a review. So if some of those things don't necessarily make sense as I'm talking through them, you might want to check out the last session. If they do make sense, hopefully they're a helpful reminder, because some of this stuff takes some time to kind of sink in. Then after that, I'm going to go through some campaign tips and actually talking about pre-planning tips. And I want to point out that there is a handout with this session, and hopefully you got that handout already. But the handout, take that handout out when we get to the pre-planning part, because that's going to be very helpful in taking notes on that actual sheet. So hopefully that'll make a better use of your webinar time. So let's get started. And just once again, this is review. Let's take a couple minutes to walk through what is a capital campaign, the basics. We had 4 things that really defined, whoops, a little fast. There we go. We had defined 4 things that really typify, or 3 things that typify a capital campaign. Number 1, they're intensive, highly coordinated fundraising efforts. Incredible amounts of work, a lot of coordination, all hands on deck, lots of people involved, fairly complicated, intense situations. They're usually a large goal, typically 3 to 10 times the budget, the annual budget of the organization. Sometimes they're even larger, though. They're for a defined period of time. Thankfully, this too shall pass. It's kind of like running a marathon. At some point, that 26th mile will show up. And then when that's done, you can rest. But until then, it's a long haul to get there. And usually, capital campaigns are for brick-and-mortar type of projects. So you're building a building, or you're buying or creating a land trust reserve of some sort, or creating something physical. But sometimes capital campaigns have other elements in them. They could include an endowment or special projects or even programming costs. They could even be just endowment. So capital campaigns sometimes end up in different forms. Now, we had talked about the different phases of the campaign, and the first phase is planning. And in the planning stage, you typically would bring on a capital campaign consultant who would conduct a planning study, and this involves conducting interviews with prospective donors, working through your case statement and making sure that you have a sound case, and really looking at the structure of how the campaign should be held. That planning phase is really the foundation of your campaign, and too often I see, and when I talk to my colleagues who are also campaign consultants, too often we see that there's a tendency to want to skip this step, but it's really, really vitally important. The next step is the quiet phase, and if any of you have ever seen that thermometer that goes up for campaigns, whether it's a little short-term campaign like a 3-month thing or a big capital campaign, when the thermometer's at 10% instead of 70%, it's pretty scary, and no one wants to really give to a campaign that's only got 10% in the bank. And so this is why we do a quiet phase. We introduce major donors who have the ability to make absolutely significant lead gifts. These are gifts that are 5, 10, 20, even 20% of the goal in one gift. And you try to secure 60 to 80% of the total goal before you move into the next phase, which is the public phase. And I said last time that if you're doing $1 million campaign, or you're doing a $5 million campaign, let's do $1 million because it's easy math, and you only have $200,000 in, you need $800,000 left. What does a donor's $1,000 really mean to an $800,000 campaign? It doesn't really mean a lot. It's kind of a drop in the bucket. But if you have that last $200,000, every $1,000 gift, every $100 gift, every $500 gift makes a difference. And so that's why we want to make sure the thermometer is as high as possible. The reading on the thermometer is as high as possible when we actually go out to the public and say, hey, we're doing a campaign. The phase after that is called celebration. This is also a skipped phase often, and this is where you go out to the community and you share with everybody and their brother, we were successful. We set a goal. We were successful. Thank you so much, and you throw a party of some sort celebrating your accomplishment and the accomplishment of your donors and your volunteers. This is a really critical phase, and it's important to remember that. And I'm going to propose a new phase, though, and this is pre-planning and actually thinking about the campaign before you're going to go into the campaign anyway. Thinking this could be a year, or 2, 3 years ahead, and really planning ahead. And I think that it's really wise. It's a good exercise at the least for every organization to think about, if we were to do a campaign in 3 years, how would we prepare for that? Because even if they don't do the campaign, they're going to be a stronger organization simply by getting ready. And so I'm going to talk through a few of those steps. But first, let's finish this review stage. One of the things that we said is, how do you raise $1 million? You don't raise it by asking 1,000 people for $1,000. It's just not how you go about this process. And so it's important to remember that that's not how it's done. Instead, how it's done is you have your donor pyramid, and you get a lot of money. See if I can get this slide right. What you have is you have a donor pyramid where you get a lot of money from a very few people. So if you look at that very top rung of that donor pyramid, you can see that the most money came from very few people. And the bottom rung, that fuchsia color, very little money came out of that. But a lot of people were involved. And so the colored triangle that has the base at the bottom, that really represents people and the number of people you have. The green one obviously represents money. And so there's an inverse relationship between those. I had also shared with you in that last session a gift range chart. And that top of the pyramid is right there where that circle is. And the circle hasn't showed up on your screen. There it is. And so this circled area, that's where the bread and butter is, especially your top 10 gifts. And securing that is a really critical stage in this process. And having that understanding, a lot of donors, and I even spoke with one today, or a nonprofit organization spoke with one today. They're really looking at trying to find the gifts down at the bottom of and their strategy right now is focused on smaller gifts first, and they're not getting those bigger gifts, and their campaign has been struggling since 2008 because of that. The last, I think this is the last, let me just check my notes quick. The last strategy that I wanted to point out, and then we're going to go into the actual pre-planning stuff, is the basic campaign strategy that you start fundraising from top to bottom. You fundraise your largest gifts first. So you need that lead gift of $100,000 or $300,000 or $500,000 before you start looking for your $100 gifts or your $1,000 gifts or even your $7,500 gifts. So you start top to bottom, and fundraising in sequential order means that thermometer is going to go up as fast as possible. The second strategy is you fundraise from the inside out. So you work with those that are closest to your organization, your board, your staff, your volunteers, and even your close donors first, and then you move out to others, people who may have never heard of the organization before. The temptation sometimes is to communicate with everyone right away, and that just isn't a sound strategy. So these are the campaign phases. I wanted to share one other thing, and the other thing is that I had so many people contact me after the last session asking about the pre-planning that I created a worksheet or a white paper on capital campaign planning studies. This is in your handout for this for the part 2 of this session. And so this is a really handy guide to really just give some of the benefits of why would you do a capital campaign planning study, and why would you make that investment. And so really take some time to think about it. If you have certain questions, by all means, give me a call. If any of this first stuff doesn't sound familiar, I want to point you back to the YouTube video for part 1 and the handout for part 1. And if you need the handout or the YouTube video, certainly you can contact me or you can contact Declan. We'd be happy to get you links or even send the files. So let's get into the meat of this session and actually talking about how to get your house in order for a capital campaign. What does it look like? What do you need to do? And I want to propose or present to you 6 different items, 6 different areas that you can look at now and present to your board or your executive director, your team, to be able to say, where are we on these 6 items? Are we prepared? Are we ready? What kind of things could we do to be even more ready for our pending campaign? So let's talk about these. The first one is strategy and strategic planning. I find a lot of organizations don't have their strategic plan in place. And a strategic plan is really an important document. It helps with really setting the next 3 to 5 years into motion and being able to say, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to get there. I've seen some clients recently getting excited about something called a strategic action plan. And that's good, or that can be good, as long as there's a strategy to talk about how are you going to actually accomplish whatever is in your action plan, whatever those foundational pillars are. And looking at that, is your plan clear? Is it engaged? Is everyone on board with it? Do you have a good track record of accomplishing your goals? And thinking about or accomplishing, you set a goal, you're going to get it done. Because campaigns are one of these things where you're going to have lots of goals, lots of different points, and it's good to get in the practice of setting a goal as an organization and rallying behind it. For some of you, that may be really, really obvious and really easy and really simple. Yeah, we're doing that all the time. I know there's others on this call that, yeah, we're not doing that. We kind of just do our thing, and when something new comes up, we kind of look at it and say, yeah, that'd be really exciting, and then don't do anything about it. So before you start your campaign, start getting in the habit of setting some strategic initiatives and moving forward on those, and really looking at how you can engage. One other thing that's helpful in a strategic plan, especially as it relates to a capital campaign, is you can do an environmental scan, and that means looking both internally at your organization, what your strengths and weaknesses are, but also looking externally, looking out into the environment to see what are the needs of the community. What are the problems in the community? What's in the future? And by looking at this, you can start preparing ahead of time for some of the challenges that you will face when you get to a campaign. And that pre-planning, you will never regret that pre-planning process. The next thing to think about is fundraising and building your fundraising program. And this may be obvious to a lot of you, but there's a lot of organizations that come to us, or come to me, or come to my colleagues, and will say, we want to do a capital campaign, we only got 30 donors, or we only got 50 donors, or we only got 100 donors. And over the last few years, they had not been building their donor base. They had not been growing that relationship. It kind of was like, we have enough money to do what we want to do, so we're just going to do the bare minimum instead of trying to ramp up their program so that when they get to the capital campaign, they're solid. So I want to talk a couple details for you. The first is the donor pyramid. I want to bring you back to that concept. Again, how the donor pyramid works is there's a lot of individuals that are in that fuchsia category. Those are regular donors. In that fuchsia category. Then there's middle donors in the blue, major donors in the yellow, and then planned givers, or the individuals that give their ultimate gift at the top. And so the wider your pyramid is, the better. Unfortunately, some of your pyramids, for a lot of organizations, end up looking like this. And so your pyramid is really skinny. You don't have a lot of people out there. Some of your organizations, your pyramid even looks like this, where you don't even have that upper echelon yet. And you haven't really established a mature major donor program. You haven't cultivated large gifts before. And so really looking at strategies to cultivate that and saying, how are we doing that? Are we doing that? That is something that's really important to pursue. In addition to that, how do you actually address that, and how do you actually look at that? Especially the small pyramid issue, where your pyramid is small and I don't have a lot of donors, or I don't have major donors, or we don't have a top to our pyramid. We need that. One of the things that's important is to start with a concept called donor acquisition. You have a donor acquisition program in place. And what you'll see is that first jump from the universe, where the universe is where no one really knows about your organization, or they know about it, but they have not engaged with a donation. They haven't engaged with a gift of some sort, or even engaged as a volunteer. And so that first step to jump them from the universe into a regular donor is something that's important to do, and that's called donor acquisition. The next step then is called donor cultivation, and it's moving donors up that pyramid over time and building their gifts, building your relationship with your donors so that they will grow. They will grow with you, and they will move up that pyramid. A lot of organizations are not spending time investing in that and getting that growth out of their pyramid right now. And really looking at, well, do we have major donors? Do we have middle donors yet? What does our planned giving program look like? And so really looking critically at that. A few other things that you might want to look at in your, we already talked about major donors, donor software. I assume that because you're on the GiftWorks webinar that you have investigated donor software and may have even invested in GiftWorks or some other donor development package. It's important to have a good database system, and this is helpful because record keeping in capital campaigns is so critical. We do not want to be entering a capital campaign with an Excel spreadsheet or a donor database that's in QuickBooks. Neither one is really designed for donors and for doing donor fundraising and cultivating or looking at that, being able to mine those resources. You need a good donor database software like GiftWorks, and I'll tell you right now, number one, GiftWorks has not paid me to say that. I'm not paid by them at all. And number two, I actually was a GiftWorks customer. I actually switched from Microsoft Access database to GiftWorks back in 2007 when I was the executive director of the Free Clinic, and so this was before I even had my consulting practice going. So it's really critical to have that donor database. We had mentioned acquisition and making sure that you're acquiring new donors and moving that way. And then we also, I had mentioned cultivation, making sure that you're cultivating your donors, that you're meeting with them. A great question to ask right now is, do you know your top 25 donors? Do you know your top 50 donors? Do you know your top 10 donors? When have you visited them? Have you visited them within the last year? Do they know you? Do they know what's going on in your organization? Building that relationship, connecting with them is a really great question and something that you should be engaging with. The other thing that you should have as you're planning a capital campaign is you should have a cash reserve. You should be building your cash reserve up. It's not wise. You're not putting yourself in the best position. It certainly isn't something that would prevent you from doing a campaign, but you're going to put yourself in the best position if you have 3 to 6 months of operating reserve in the bank so that you have money to start the campaign, to pay for the planning study, to pay for whatever other expenses are in the process. If you need to get a database, if you need to get some sort of service, or you have to get architectural designs, having those funds in cash reserve is really helpful. And that's part of that fundraising process of being prepared and being ready, building up your program. We're at about the halfway point of the webinar, and I'm going to talk next about your staff and board. But while I'm doing that, if you are thinking of any questions or if anything's coming to your mind where it's like, yeah, Brent, great, but how do I do this? Or what am I supposed to do this? Or what is your opinion on this? Right now might be a great time to put a question in that chat box for Declan to kind of collect. At the end of this session, in about 15 minutes, I'm going to take some questions and from you, and so you're going to be able to put some questions in. And so this is really about you and not about me. If I can help you in any way, put that questions in there, and I'd love to help with that. Next, the next thing that you can really look at is your staff and is your board in good shape? Are they healthy? Do you have the right leadership in your executive director, in your development director, in your staff? Do you have the right leadership on your board? Do you have the right board members? Do you have the right clout? Have you looked at, in preparing for a campaign, what board members' access they have to philanthropy, what access they have, what skills they have with public relations and with engagement? The board has to have, ideally will have a very engaged role in your campaign, and so making sure you have the right board for a campaign is something that's very important. Do your board and staff have the right skills? Have they been trained? Are they, do they understand their roles and how to do them well? Have they demonstrated effectiveness? These are things that certainly some of these things, any one of these things, as we look at the checklist, there may be some where you're looking and saying, yeah, my organization doesn't have this. That may not mean that you would not be able to complete a capital campaign successfully, but it may mean that it's something for you to work on and move toward. No organization has perfect scores on this entire questionnaire or on this entire checklist. It just doesn't exist. So you're going to come in with certain challenges, but can you look ahead and say, let's fix this one or let's knock this one off. Check this box that we're ready for our campaign. Is your board and staff unified? Do they get along? Are they working together? Do they collaborate? A board that does not get along with the staff and vice versa is really, it's better to fix that problem first and then go into the capital campaign. So make sure that you guys are working together and you get that. And then finally, do you have succession plans? It's really a bad thing to enter a capital campaign and have the executive director quit 6 months into the campaign, or have your board president step down. And so having plans for those situations so that you're ready and it doesn't come as a surprise, or if it does come as a surprise, you at least know what to do about it. You have people in place to step in and get it done and do what you need to do. What you're really doing in this whole staff and board area is the goal, and if I can give you a central goal to think about in the staff and board area, is you need to start behaving as a staff or as a board like you would with the organization that you are going to grow into. So you want to start behaving like a bigger organization than you are. So if you are a $1 million organization and you're going to do a capital campaign and our budget over time, you're going to double your properties or something like that, you should start practicing operating like an organization that's larger than you actually are, so that once you get to that size, you're ready and it doesn't surprise you and you don't have to deal with those types of problems. Next, let's talk about the project a little bit. First question with the project is it a compelling case? Not only do you need to look at the community need and really think about the community needs and what, whether it is an animal shelter, a homeless shelter, an art gallery, a nursing home, even a cemetery. I've actually had cemeteries contact me before. But it doesn't matter what it is that you're doing. Is it compelling? Is it one of those things that it may not be compelling to everyone, but is there a population, a segment that says, wow, this is so needed, and it's so important we get this done, and our community, our city, our region, our country will be better if we do this. And I'm willing to put my money behind it. I'm willing to put my name behind it. I'm willing to put my volunteer time behind it. Is it that compelling? And if it's not, then you can start honing that and figure out why it's not. Figure out how to address that and how to build the case that you have. By the way, the case is one of the things that is honed and expanded upon and developed in the capital campaign planning study. And it's one of those that once you have that case put together, your consultant will go out and actually ask questions about the case and try to get donor feedback on the case to have a better understanding of how do they respond to it. But that's not something you have to wait for the planning study to start doing. You can do that now. You also should start building some initial plans. And so some of that may be contacting an architect and seeing if you can get a draft design, just some basics. To be able to see what would this look like. What would this cost? Are we talking $1 million? Are we talking $4 million? To have a ballpark of what's realistic and what could work or how that could work. You also should probably look at a timeline and really think about into the future, how would this work? And what I often find is organizations like in their timeline to do everything in 3 months. We want to do the whole campaign in 3 months. Or we want to do the whole campaign in 6 months. And often campaigns take 18 months. They take 12 to 24 months. They take longer. They're not something that can be done just rapidly. Especially major donors, donors that have the capacity to give $100,000 or $200,000, they're not going to let go of their money instantly. They want to do their investigation. They want to check with their stockbrokers or their investment brokers or their bankers or their financial advisors. And so this is a process that takes time, and it often takes longer than what my clients or what the boards that I work for or the executive directors or even the steering committee chairs, it takes longer than they think it's going to. And so anticipate that, and whatever your timeline is, add a year, add 12 months, or even better yet, contact someone to see, is this a realistic time frame? Because often it needs to be expanded out a little bit in order for it to be realistic. You'll also want to do a budget. Even if your budget isn't on target, it's good to start talking about realistic numbers. Is this a $500,000 campaign? Is it $1 million? Is it a 1.8? Is it 5.6 million? What is your goal? And what does that look like? And what is all in there? In your campaign budget, you need to have what is the capital cost. So what does it cost to buy the building or build the building? What is furniture, fixtures and equipment, FF&E? What does that cost? What are you going to need for operations? And do you have enough money for operations? What does the actual campaign itself cost? The consultants and the fundraising costs, the direct mail costs, all of that. All that should be wrapped into your campaign budget. You also should do a pro forma and think of a pro forma or a budget for your operations into the future. So once you open your building, once you open or complete your campaign, what is your budget going to be? And is that reasonable to achieve? Can you actually raise that amount of money over a sustained period of time annually? So that's something to think about as well. The final one, the final area to think about as you're planning for your capital campaign in a few years is really to think about counsel and hiring capital campaign counsel and who that is. And where I'm about to go with this, if what I'm going to say in the next couple minutes about campaign counsel offends you, then I would recommend don't hire me as a consultant. That's okay. I will be fine. But do hire someone. All but the most mature organizations are really going to need capital campaign counsel to walk them through these. They're very intensive. They're not done frequently in organizations. Not a lot of development directors or executive directors have experience in it. Even if they do, it's really good to have an outside, dispassionate view of what is going on in your campaign. There's also things that a campaign consultant can do that you really can't. Your donors may not want to have a confidential conversation with you. But they might be willing to do that with a campaign consultant. They may not want to have, they may not want to be, real frank with you, but that consultant can help you with those aspects. Consultants can also be really good intermediaries between the board and the staff, or between the executive director and the steering committee chair. Those are part of the benefits of having those people together. So something to think about there. Now, how do you prepare if you know that you're going to have a campaign in a couple of years? Here's a couple ideas. Number one, see if you can identify some capital campaign counsel, some people that do this. Places to find them. Webinars, here's an example. The GiftWorks webinar or other webinars that you participate in, you can start looking and listening to consultants. You can also go to conferences and listen to some of the consultants that present. Most conferences will have consultants presenting. Go up and meet them. Ask them questions. Understand their philosophy. You want someone who you not only find competent, but you also want someone who's a good fit. Do you like them? Do you get along with them? Do you trust them? Do you respect them? Because it really doesn't matter how much they know if you don't respect them, or if you don't like them, or if you can't stand to spend time with them, because campaigns are messy, and they have a lot of emotion in them, and they have a lot of tension, and there's some conflict in them. And in those tense moments, you're going to want to have a relationship with whoever you're working with that is good enough that you can withstand those issues regardless of what that campaign consultant knows. And so it's important that they both are competent and a good fit. And so you don't want to just race in necessarily and hire someone. It's important to look around. It's important to think about that and to investigate that. So I'd encourage you to contact your local, your state nonprofit association is a great place to go. The Association of Fundraising Professionals often has lists as well. And another place you can go is ask colleagues. Ask those that are your colleagues in other nonprofits, who have they worked with, or who do they know that is doing a great job in this field. So those are some ways to engage in getting ready for that campaign and thinking about that consultant. And so what we had talked about again, these are on this checklist. What we're looking at, wait for the slide to change, on this checklist, you don't have to have everything just right. You don't have to have everything perfect, but it's good to do the assessment ahead of time and actually think about, how is my strategic plan? Are we ready on fundraising? Is the staff and board ready for this project? Is the project compelling, and do we think that we can pull this project off? And have we connected or reached out to qualified counsel who can help us actually navigate the rough waters of a campaign? So asking these questions, you're going to be pleased with the results, because it's going to help you to be stronger as you enter these challenging phases. I often have used the metaphor of running a marathon to doing a capital campaign. And this is part of the training that you can do to get ready for that capital campaign so that you can be as effective as possible. While it may be possible for you to finish a 26-mile run, by going out tomorrow and just starting and doing it, it's probably not going to be terribly comfortable and terribly effective. And it'll probably take you longer than you need to. So if you can prepare a few months or a few years ahead of time, that's going to make your process work and flow a lot better. That is the end of my presentation. I have one more thing that I want to share, and then I'm going to open this up to questions. I offer a free 45-minute consultation. And we can talk about any topic that you want. We can talk about public relations, fundraising, strategic planning, governance, executive leadership. We can talk about your career if you want. I'm happy to talk with you as my availability is there. I actually, after part one, had some great conversations. I met with Rabbi Yaakov from Jeep in Cincinnati and Allison from the Waldorf School in Philadelphia. Talked to Kirsten from the Autism Society of Wisconsin and Mike from Crossroads up in Ashland, Wisconsin. And I've even had a brief conversation with Claudia from Florida. And so these conversations, we were able to talk about some very specific things within their campaigns or within their projects and just point them in the right way. If as we talk together, it ends up in business, great. If it doesn't, no guilt trips, no harm, no foul. I'm not going to harass you. That's not my style. I just, I know that I came from not one but two small organizations where I struggled to get good resources, where I struggled to get even a direction. What do I do next? Like, what book should I read, or how should I talk to someone, or what do I do for help? And I had no one out there. And so I started to offer this, and I found that a lot of people have really found it to be very helpful. So if I can be of help to you, send me an email. I'd be happy to talk with you, and we can set up a time to actually schedule something. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat. And now, Declan, if you have questions for me, I'd be happy to take them.
Definitely. I'm just reading through them. A lot of great questions, so let's get right into it. Heather wrote in, is it possible to run a capital campaign with out-of-state counsel? Work with them just over phone/email?
Okay, so I hear two questions from you, Heather. Number one is, let's deal with both of them. Is it possible to work with out-of-state counsel? Yes, absolutely. I'm currently engaged in a campaign in the state of Washington, and I live in Wisconsin. At the same time, when I did my capital campaign for the Ruth House Women's Shelter in Eau Claire, when I was a development director, we hired counsel from Pittsburgh. So it's very, very common to get counsel elsewhere. The second question is email and phone. The email and phone, I'm very resistant to. And I would suspect that most capital campaign consultants are going to say, nope, I got to have my feet on the ground. And certainly you can't do a campaign planning study without spending probably a couple weeks on site at least. It's going to involve some on-site work. So you just can't meet with a donor one-on-one by the phone. They're not going to be as honest with you. They're not going to be as open. And you're not going to be able to learn as much about them by being on the phone. As you're listening to this webinar, what do you know about me? You've heard some things that I've talked about, but do you know about my family? Do you know what I look like? Do you know how tall I am? Do you have any impression of what my financial background would be? Do you have any interest, any idea of what I drive as a car or what my style is? Probably not. And it's hard to get that over the phone. It's hard to get that by email. And there's a lot that can be read into emails. Emails are kind of a mixed bag when it comes to communication, so that in-person is really needed. The other thing is, once the campaign goes and is running, it is very common for the campaign consultants to be on site at least once a month, sometimes twice. Here's the reason why. It's when I get on site, when I fly out to Washington, which is the current campaign that I'm working on, when I get on site, there is a lot of motivation for people, oh, shoot, Brent's coming. I better get my calls done. I don't want to tell him that I didn't get my work done. I don't want to say I didn't do what I said I would do. We've got a steering committee coming. So having that face-to-face contact is really, really a critical aspect of this campaign process. Now, there's some ways that we can reduce it. I don't need to be on site for 4 days every trip. Often I'm on site for usually less than a day. I'll stop in for 6-8 hours, meet with them, get on a plane, and fly home. And that is just enough to be able to look face to face, for them to know I'm for them to be able to deal with additional issues, to do the meet and greet that needs to be done to build relationship. And if there's anything that capital campaigns are all about, it's really all about relationship, Heather. And so over the phone, there's only so much that can be done, especially given the intensity of these things. So I think that it's an expense. It's going to add some expense to your campaign budget, but it is a very necessary and very important investment to make sure that you have your counsel on site. Now, for smaller projects, you may not want to spend the money, and by smaller projects I mean like under $500,000. You may not want to spend the money to have as many visits from your counsel. But when you get over $1 million, it's time to do it right and to make sure that you have your counsel on site and that's the way you're going. So I hope that helps you, Heather. If you have more questions, certainly send me an email or give me a call. I'd be happy to help.
Next one is from Cheryl. What would be a reasonable range of cost for a campaign consultant, and what would you expect from them?
Okay. Reasonable cost, you're going to be looking, depending on the size of the campaign, and it varies from the size. You're going to be looking at probably somewhere between 8 and 12% of the total goal over the length of the campaign. And that's just a rough ballpark. You're not paying your consultant by a percentage, so it's important to verify that. The EFP, Association of Fundraising Professionals, along with CASE and AHP and others, find that commission-based fundraising is unethical, and so it's not by a commission, but it just can give you a range. So if you're looking at $1 million campaign, you're probably going to be looking at $80,000 to $120,000 worth of expense for your counsel. And that would include, what does that include? It includes your campaign planning study and doing all of the work that's involved in your study. And the study is a tremendous amount of work. Typically 25 to 40 interviews. It involves development of the case. It involves meeting with the board. It involves meeting with the staff, site visits. There's a lot of work involved in that. And they're very complicated. It also includes then ongoing campaign counsel throughout that process. And so that ongoing campaign counsel would include site visits. It would include helping with written materials, helping with, just this last week, I rewrote the gift range table, and providing advice to you and your volunteers on how to do this the best way possible so that your campaign will be effective, will be efficient, will be quick, as quick as possible. There are examples, too, when I get questions, how do we deal with this? What do we do? And at least in my case, I'm on call all the time. And so my clients can call me whenever they want, and they get unlimited call and email and that kind of thing. That's very common with campaign consultants. I know I'm not unique in that. So that's what you're getting.
From Rachel, what are common mistakes that organizations make when executing the public phase of a capital campaign?
Rachel, I love your name. My daughter's name is Rachel Ruth. So first of all, I have to just point that out. I think it's a very pretty name. As far as what to do in the public campaign, and that's the question, correct, Declan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So some common mistakes, probably the most common mistake that organizations do regarding the public phase of a capital campaign is they launch the public phase too early. There's two things that you really need to have in place in order to go into the public phase. Number one is you should have 60 to 80% of your goal in hand, cash or pledges. So you want to have that dollar amount. And the second factor that you want in order to launch capital or launch your public phase is you want to have the final 40 to 20%, whatever the balance is that you need to have that in sight You should have qualified prospects, which means you look at your gift range chart and it says we need 30 donors that can give $10,000 each. You need to have 30 names at least, preferably 60 or 90 names that can give $10,000 each. You need to have all those identified before you launch your public phase of that campaign. You need to have your strategies all set so that when you're ready, you know for sure. We're announcing our official goal, because when you go public, when you have your going public, when you actually go public, you're announcing your official goal. Until then, you can change your goal up or down or adjust that. You're announcing the official name of your campaign. You're announcing where you're at in the campaign. And so making sure that you are going to be successful when you go public is absolutely critical. And too many organizations go public way, way, way too early. Some of them go public, they never had a quiet phase, they just start public. And that's why they're not making their goals. A couple other mistakes that I see in the public phase is when you get to the public phase, a lot of organizations think that, well, we can start just sending direct mail letters and that will do it. And you can't forget in the public phase that it's still all about relationships. So you need to have teams going out and continuing to make face-to-face meetings and doing as many of those. Certainly direct mail is a valuable tool, but you can't forget that relationship is just a really critical aspect to the public phase. I guess one final one that I would say is that I see a lot of organizations that go really, really heavy with events. And as any veteran fundraiser will know, whether they've done capital campaigns or not, events are incredibly labor-intensive and often not as successful from a financial or net profit standpoint as we'd like them to be. So being cautious as to how you use events, I'm not saying don't, but being very wise as to how you invest your time in events and very strategic as to which events you choose to go with is an important thing to do.
Next question is from Rod. My board is extremely cautious. We have identified a fundraiser, an architect, have plans, everything ready, but can't get the board to pull the trigger to actually move on the campaign. How can I get them going?
Well, I guess I would say I got 3 ideas, and what you're asking probably requires a conversation offline. So, Rod, I'd recommend you give me an email and let's actually talk about the details of this, because there's probably a story underneath here somewhere that we can unearth and figure out a way to move you forward. Here's 3 thoughts that I have, though. Number 1 is that your board most likely is scared. And one of the things that I found very, very helpful is to have what's called, John Maxwell, I guess, termed this, the meeting before the meeting. And that is where you meet with each board member, or you meet with strategic board members one-on-one in person, and you talk about their concerns, and you address their issues, and you secure their support outside of the meeting so that when you get back into the meeting, they're going to vote yes. That meeting before the meeting is something that should be a frequently used tool of probably any executive director out there to move that forward. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it sometimes helps to have a very supportive donor who says, you know what, I believe in this so much, I will pay for the study, the planning study, and I'll pay for that part. And so if the board's not out any money, sometimes that helps them to make that step. And sometimes big donors will be able to say, you know what, I'll put up the 25 grand for the study. I'll just write the check, or I'll put whatever the cost is. I'll put that money up, and then that will work. The third thing is it may not be time. If your board is not engaged, if your board is not interested, if your board is stuck, it may mean that you got to deal with your board issue first. And then after you deal with your board issue, then they're comfortable moving forward. Your board might be uncomfortable with the fundraiser that you hired, the person that you're working with, and therefore they're not moving forward. They might be uncomfortable with the plans. There's something that they're uncomfortable with, and that needs to be addressed before they can confidently move forward. And so I think that takes conversations with your board president to say, all right, we've got all this in plan. Why are we not moving forward? And how can you, Mr. or Mrs. President, help us move forward so that we can be effective? So, Rod, I hope that's helpful to you. The meeting before the meeting, getting a donor to help you pay for that planning study sometimes helps greases the skids, or finding out what is the problem that's really blocking things, and seeing how you move forward then. I hope that helps, Rod.
I guess to piggyback off that question, Eileen is asking, is it possible to do a campaign with an inactive board?
Oh, yes, it is possible. It's not preferred, and it's not very effective. So sometimes you start the campaign, you do your planning study, and during that process, you also, as you're doing the planning study, sometimes that campaign consultant can help stir the pot a little bit and kind of move the board forward. Because sometimes the board just doesn't know what to do. I mean, these are, when you think about board members, some boards have what are almost, they're veteran board members. They've been on multiple boards. They know what they're doing. There's other boards, though, that are out there that they're really inexperienced. They don't know what they're doing, and they need help. They need training. They need someone that they trust. And that consultants sometimes can come in and help grease those skids and move that forward and provide the training or the credibility or whatever that is. A major donor can sometimes do that. Sometimes inserting a new board member in who does have that background can help as well in moving that. But certainly the board is going to have to be engaged at some point during the campaign, or it's likely going to fail. And here's why. The donors that are going to be putting $100,000 into your campaign want to know that those that are behind the wheel, those that are in charge of this organization, that it's going to take a good chunk of their money, they want to know that your organization is okay. They want to know that your board members are engaged, that they are alive, that they have a pulse, that they are investing, and that they're digging in. And if they don't have that confidence, if they don't feel confident that your board really has that, then they're going to be skittish to support your campaign. And so a couple of those metrics is, number one, is 100% of your board giving. Then the board needs to give a gift. And that's something that's really important. Is your board willing to volunteer and step up in that way? Really looking at, are your volunteers, are your board members writing good policy? Are they at least running good board meetings? And if that's no, then you might want to bring someone in to help you deal with those board issues, those board governance things. And whether that be me or whether that be someone else, bringing someone in to help address the board issues before the campaign may be ideal. And if you have to move forward with the campaign, then during the campaign. But without question, at the end, the board has to be engaged.
From Tracy, if one doesn't have a fundraising board, where is the next best place to go?
All right. So there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that don't have a fundraising board, a board that can go out and easily get. They've got connections with folks that can give six-figure gifts. A lot of boards are made up of very well-meaning, middle-class professionals, or sometimes, middle-class professionals that are doing their absolute best, but that's not the league that they play in. And so how do you address that? Usually your pre-planning study, your campaign planning study will address that issue. So in that planning study, you'll go out and meet with individuals that are in that league and try to talk to them and see how do we get individuals to participate at that level. And see if we can get one of those individuals to be part of that, or two or three to be part of the steering committee for the campaign itself. So what you're trying to do is get individuals in your community to lend their network, to lend their experience, their expertise, their connections, and their wisdom to your project, even if you don't have that resource on the board. It's the same way that you would do anything else in your organization. How do you get someone with the accounting expertise if you don't have that on your board? Well, you hire an accountant, or you see if you can find a volunteer accountant. It's the same thing. It's just that we, in this case, need to find somebody who can help with the fundraising side, and that often is solved by your planning study. Good question, Tracy.
From Cindy, how do you determine the top gift amount? For example, our top givers give maybe $1,000 a year. What amount do we ask them to consider?
Okay. We had, and I'm going to go back to this real quick here. Let me pull this slide up. Okay. This is going to pop up on your screen in a second. Should be there right about now. So this is that gift range chart that we had talked about before. Donors don't give $1,000. You don't ask 1,000 donors for $1,000. What you're going to do is you create a gift range chart, and this is how campaigns have been run for the last probably 50 years. This is just, there's very few things in fundraising that are recipes or are structurally, this is the way they fall. This is one of those things that is a recipe. It is a science in some ways. You start with a very large gift. So if you have $1 million gift, if you're looking for $1 million goal, you need a gift somewhere between 10 and 20%. Typically, that first gift is between 10 and 20% of the total goal. And so, yes, you have to find someone with $150,000 or $200,000 ability to give a gift that way. Now, we can break that down to say $150,000 is only, and I say that with a little bit of a smirk, but it's only $50,000 a year for 3 years. And so for some people, that's actually comfortable. It may mean that you have to reach out. You may have donors in your current donor base, or it may mean you have to reach into the universe to individuals who have never participated or actually supported your organization before and invite them to make that first big gift. And that's something that, once again, you determine in your study. Because, for example, with this gift chart, you may be able to identify, okay, this is where our top gifts are, but the bottom gifts are really suspect. So we have to adjust the gift chart so that we have a lot more people at the bottom. Or, you know, we just don't have a lot of people at the bottom, so that means we need to push some of those gifts up. So our next gift, instead of $150,000, our next gift on this campaign would have to be $100,000. And so we're going to need one gift of $150,000, another gift of $100,000, and 2 gifts of $75,000. So it's that planning, and this is something that you bring Campaign Counsel in to help you with. So I hope that helps, Cindy.
From Christy, what if you have a donor that gave a lead gift toward a project, but your organization is not ready for the campaign? Do you give the money back or redirect them to a different project?
Ooh, great question. Well, number one, if they gave it to a campaign, ethically, you have to have a conversation with that donor, and so really this is their decision. But I think having an honest conversation with them and being able to say, this is a situation, this is what's going on. I'm not sure if you solicited that gift or if the donor just gave it. Sometimes the donor will just give it. But meet with that donor and say, situation has changed. This is how we're going. We want to honor you and your generous gift. Here are some options on what to do with that. We would be happy to return it to you. We could redirect it to this project if you would like. And here's the benefits of that project, and we'd be happy to answer more questions about this. Or we can simply keep it as part of our general fund. But right at this time, we're not going to do the project that we had either anticipated on doing or that you had anticipated that we were going to do. So, and I think having just an honest conversation with your donor is the best practice, and a lot of donors really respect that. If you're honest with them, there's a lot of my clients that are scared to be open with their donors or to be honest with their donors. But my experience is that most donors are really grateful when they're able to have a real conversation with the organizations that they participate in, because they see that as, wow, we're really a partner with them. They respect me enough to tell me the truth. And I think that's better than trying to cover things up or hide or make yourself look good. So hopefully that helps you, Christy. Maybe worth another conversation, though, that's for sure.
Yeah. This one's from Claudia. Is it bad practice to have major donors involved in the planning process? Should they not know the behind-the-scenes issues, or does that make them feel disconnected then?
Well, I think it's important to be strategic about this. I think in general, it's actually really good to have your major donors involved in that process. And with engagement comes money. So what I'm constantly coaching my clients to do is to engage your donors. Go ask them questions. So instead of using our lawyer, let's use Bob's lawyer. Instead of using, we could make this decision ourselves, but let's invite Eunice to come down and meet with us and actually talk through this decision as well. Let's invite them to participate in this process. Let's get their counsel. And there's an old fundraising maxim that says when you ask for money, you get advice, and when you ask for advice, you get money. And so asking your donors is really helpful. Now, you need to be careful with this, too. You don't want to air all your dirty laundry out, and you obviously need to be professional in how you handle that. But it's not a bad thing to show them that your organization has some challenges or has some issues. In fact, it's probably a good thing because then they at least know. It's better to know what the skeleton is than to know there's a skeleton in the closet, you just don't know what it is. So it's sometimes better to know what that is than to let their mind go off. That's the first thing. But the second thing is it also is better that they that they know some of the challenges, because there are times when they'll invest. And I'll give you one very quick story. My project out in Washington is for a homeless youth shelter. And the very top prospect that we're talking to came aware of the fact that the executive director is young and is learning this process and is learning how to do this, is a new executive director. And so this donor donated some airline miles for the executive director to go to an organization that's very similar in mission to learn from them. And so by identifying that there's this weakness or this, and this is a competent executive director, but that there's an opportunity for development, this major donor was able to really participate, and this donor's really excited that, oh my gosh, they're doing what I had suggested. And it's become a really good relationship, and it's actually built the engagement. So that would be my thought. That would be my recommendation to you.
Speaking of new, from Sam, as a young new development coordinator, what can I do to become better connected with my CEO, the board, and major donors?
Great question. Okay, so my advice to you to be connected with your CEO and the board. You may not get a lot of access to the board. Just be real honest. I don't know what your executive director, how your executive director feels. I also don't know in your situation, Sam, if you have a development director. Because if you have a development director and you're two under the board, you may not have a lot of ready access. As far as connecting with the executive director, a couple suggestions. One is to ask them, would you mentor me? I'd like to learn more. And as long as that's a safe relationship and that's something that would work, could we go out to lunch? Could we go out for coffee? And actually, I'd like to learn from you is something that's helpful. Asking for their advice is sometimes helpful as well, and engaging them in that way. As far as engaging with your major donors, a couple things. If your organization doesn't have a director, an executive director, you may want to, or a development director, you may want to see if you can get a title change. Even instead of development coordinator, development officer would sound better than development coordinator. So changing that title might be helpful. And like I said, I don't know where you are in the org chart or how that all comes together. Another thing that's helpful when making connections is to use someone else's connections. And so if you have a board member that is friends with a major donor that you want to connect with, ask that board member to connect you with that major donor. And your board member is Judy, and Judy knows Hazel. And so Judy says, Hazel, I'd really want you to meet, I'd really like you to meet Sam, and I think that would be really helpful. Would you be willing to meet her for coffee? Would you be willing to meet him for coffee? I'm not sure, Sam, which one you are. So, but that's something to think about. So, seeing if you can leverage other people's networks, and that's something that fundraisers do all the time, is leverage other people's networks. So, great question.
Next question from Miranda. What's the best way to turn patrons into donors in the donor acquisition phase?
I don't know what your definition difference is between patron and donor. So I don't know that I can answer that question real well. So why don't you send me an email, Randa, and we can talk about that in further depth.
This one's from Nicole. Why do we need Counsel? We're a nonprofit that holds about $300,000 in the bank and raise about $10,000 per year.
Well, if you got $300,000 in the bank and you raise $10,000 a year, you may not need Counsel. If you are a $10,000 organization and you are planning a capital campaign to do $1 million or $2 million goal and you have never raised that much money, that's a time when you might want some Counsel to come in and help you. And so at that point, it might make a lot of sense to bring someone in. I'm not recommending you bring in Counsel for every situation or every problem, but capital campaigns are very specific. And I should differentiate a capital campaign from an annual campaign, because if your annual goal is to raise $10,000 and you're really good at that, and you do that every year, keep going. You don't need to hire a professional to come in and tell you how to raise what you already know how to do. But capital campaigns are unique in the fact that they are, like I said, it's probably similar to you're used to running 3 miles every day, but you've never run a marathon. So getting some outside counsel, getting some outside help to learn how to run that marathon is why I'm recommending that for capital campaign purposes, you get Counsel, especially because the typical capital campaign is 3 to 10 times the size of the annual budget.
Let's sneak a few more questions in before we go. We want to respect that everyone signed on for a little over an hour, but let's sneak 2 to 3 more in, and then we'll call it a day. Brent, this one's from Jennifer. Should you hire a consultant for the planning phase as well as the execution phase of the campaign?
Yes, and not only should you hire someone for both of those phases, but you should hire the same person. So whoever you hire for the planning phase, you should hopefully do your homework enough that you like them enough that you'll have them for both phases. Because if they go through the planning phase, they're going to have some very, very personal, deep conversations with donors that are confidential, and they will hold on to that confidential information. So I learned about divorces. I've learned about bankruptcies. I've learned about all sorts of different things that I can't tell my clients because it's held in confidence. The donor says, don't tell this to anybody, but I want you to know this. And so I know ahead of time this information, which is really helpful to me in then providing counsel. So, well, we think we should go ask John for money. And I can say, I just don't think now is a good time to ask John for money. Really? Well, yeah, I don't think now is the time to ask him. I would hold off for about, let's ask him 3 or 4 months down the road. Let's ask him 6 months down the road when the divorce is final, or when whatever the issue is that is the problem. And so that campaign counsel is really helpful with that. Campaign counsel in the execution phase, or the implementation phase, is also helpful because there are some situations where, for example, the steering committee chair is not going to listen to the executive director, or the executive director is going off in a direction and the steering committee chair is frustrated with it. And having that campaign counsel is incredibly helpful to keep the team together and keeping them on course and keeping them focused on what they need to do. And the last thing is that, and I brought this up a couple times, campaign counsel, they do campaigns regularly. So they know what should be done at each phase. Whereas traditional development staff that are used to running annual giving campaigns and major giving campaigns and running in their organization, the capital campaign is somewhat foreign to them. It's somewhat new to them. And so having that outside counsel is incredibly helpful in both the planning phase and the execution phase, the implementation phase, so that that you're meeting the right benchmarks. When you run into problems, you got someone to talk to and actually brainstorm with and address, who has a lot of experience in campaigns and understands how they function. So Jennifer, that would be my recommendation, or that's why I think that is something to strongly consider.
From Michelle, how do you balance sense of urgency with need for planning when boards want to move fast?
Michelle, I have to tell you, I think most people on the phone or on the webinar today would love to be in your shoes. I find too many boards where you're cracking the whip instead of pulling back on the reins. And so you're in some ways in an admirable position. And I don't know your whole story, so you might be, what are you thinking? But in many ways, it's easier to deal with the racehorse than it is to deal with the mule that won't move forward. When you have a board that's not planning or not thinking through all the details, one is sometimes you just need to run with them and trust them that as volunteers they got it going on, they know what they're doing, and they're going to get there. Now, sometimes boards are not. They don't know what they're doing, or they don't have it. That is, again, where counsel can be a good help, and leaning on your counsel to help pull back on the reins. I had a conversation today with my team where I said, okay, we need to slow this down slightly. Here's your milestones. Here's how we're going to reframe this thing, because you're getting really excited and you're moving forward fast. But there's also some times when you pull a couple people to the side, again, have that meeting before the meeting where you talk with some others and get their perspective, and talk to them about, okay, offline, outside of the board meeting, this is where I think we are. This is what the challenge is. I need your help in slowing this down. I need your help in addressing this. And you need to be very careful because, like I said, it's much harder to get people to move than it is to slow down. And so if you have them moving, in some cases, you know what, do the diligence, do the planning, pull 2-3 people offline, let's do the planning, let's get it done in an afternoon or an hour or in a day or whatever it happens to do, so that we have our diligence done, and then let's just go. If your board wants to make meetings, if your board is doing what they got to do, let them go. Now, there's one other thing, though. Some boards, they want to go, but they don't want to do any work. And so what they're doing is, the only work they're doing is flapping their jaw. And in that situation, and all they're doing is saying, go, 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 you need to work faster, faster, faster. That's where I think a dose of reality is helpful. Having a veteran donor, a veteran board member, a consultant, to be able to speak with the board and say, okay, this is unrealistic, and we can't go this fast, or you need to participate if this is going to happen, is really something that's important to do. So, Michelle, I hope this is helpful. If you have more issues or more questions, or I'm not completely satisfying your question, please feel free to give me an email, and I'll see if I can do more justice to it.
Let's end right there. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. If we didn't get to yours, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but definitely email Brent. He's a super nice guy. He will get back to you. His email is right there, brent@newdaynonprofit.com, right there at the bottom of this slideshow. And, yeah, Brent, do you have any final closing comments before we get out of here?
Absolutely. I just want to thank everyone for participating and for listening in. The big thing that I want you to leave this campaign, capital campaign session with is that this is something that you can plan for and that you can think ahead on. And take that campaign checklist, try to pick 2 or 3 things that you can improve on it and work on those. Don't be disheartened that you don't have everything perfect. You're never going to have everything perfect, so it's not a prevent you from doing the campaign. Capital campaigns are hard. They are a lot of work. They're also really fun, and they have a lot of really cool things in them and a really lot of cool opportunities to see people's generosity and see people's engagement and enthusiasm and build support for your organization. So it's wise to come in informed, but also really energized and engaged. And I just wish you all the best in your campaign and whatever work you're doing. If I can be of help to you in any way, do not hesitate to email me. And thank you very much. God bless.